Tiger fans, welcome back to another edition of the Clemson Sports Show. I'm your co-host, Joseph Hastings, and joining me today, as always, is Matt Connolly. And I'm sorry for our listeners on podcasts here and those who can't see this on YouTube, but we have the smart edition of Matt Connolly today. He's got the glasses on. He's outside at a restaurant. So we're glad to have you back on, Matt. And I'm going to ask you real quickly, man, how are things going? It's been a couple of days since Clemson lost against NC State on the road. How's everything been for you, man?
Yeah, it's been good. Just still surprised by that loss, but I guess at this point it's hard to be too surprised with anything we see from Clemson. This might be one of those years. Dabo talked about it some today, and I'm sure we'll get into it. But before this crazy run of 6 straight playoffs and ACC championships, they were in plenty of dog fights and kind of scrapping and just trying to find ways to win games. So I think it's going to be one of those years, it seems like, for the Clemson Tigers this year.
Yeah, it definitely seems so, and I'm glad that you brought up Coach Dabo Swinney. He spoke with the media, as always, on Tuesday morning. Really talked about Boston College, what they bring to the table, gave some perspective to the season, as you had mentioned, in terms of some of the trip-ups they've had in previous years. Not necessarily the past 6 years because they've been, dominant making the playoffs, but before then. What did you make about Coach Swinney putting some context around this season and saying, in order to go forward, you need to move backwards? That was something that he reiterated a lot.
For sure, yeah. I thought it was interesting, and it's something I'm going to write about later this week. Is just, he said we're going back to camp, is what he called it. Just trying to get the fundamentals down, because that's really been the issue. It's been the missed assignments, it's been jumping off sides, it's been missing holes. This easy routine stuff that really you try to get ironed out during camp, and then once the season starts, you're able to just game plan and worry more about teams. Well, Clemson, forget game plan and forget all that kind of stuff. The focus for Clemson right now is just trying to do the basic, simple things that they've just been screwing up for whatever reason through the first 4 weeks of the year. So, yeah, it's just trying to get back at it, work on the simple things, and then you can get a little more complex. And I know everyone wants to see different play calling and open up the playbook and all that kind of stuff, but none of that can happen if you're not doing the simple things. And so it all starts there, and that's what Clemson's focus is right now.
A lot of people, at least from the outside looking in, will say, this is Clemson. They're going to bounce back. I was in that camp as well, thinking that they're going to get this thing together. The offense is going to get back to what we've been accustomed to seeing. But, on the other side of it, from a different perspective, this is also a completely different group of players that we haven't seen for the Tigers. This isn't Trevor Lawrence out there. They're missing some key players in slot like Amari Rodgers. What do you think about that in terms of these young players like DJ and Will Shipley before he got hurt, having to face this adversity now, something that they probably haven't been accustomed to in a while?
Yeah, I think DJ will keep improving as the year goes along. I think that he's a good enough quarterback, has a good enough arm, works hard enough that he's not going to have a problem eventually just turning things around and playing better. But for the rest of the offense, it's hard. The offensive line, I think at this point, and Dabo said it several times this year, it is what it is. This is what we got. We can't go to the transfer portal and add new players, or we can't go sign a free agent or whatever. We kind of have what we have. So I think that there's just a lot of youth and inexperience at offensive line. I think obviously Marcus Tate started the season there. It wasn't going great. Paul Teo came in and played some this week, maybe a little better, but still not great. You've got Matt Bockhorst playing center now, which is a position he's not accustomed to. Hunter Rayburn came in some this past week and got some work at left guard. I didn't think that he played all that well, just being quite honest. So it's just hard to see the offensive line really improving. Now you've lost your top running back for the year. Or not for the year, but you've lost your top running back so far this year for at least a few weeks, and Will Shipley. So now you're kind of going to a redshirt freshman who hasn't been as effective. So I just don't think it's a situation where a flip switches and everything's better. I think this is going to be a long process, and I just don't think that it's going to be a great offensive season for Clemson.
So going back to your point about, this not being a quick fix, and that's something that Dabo touched on, you wrote an article about the transfer targets that Clemson could have dipped into and potentially landed this past off season. This is a two-parter. Tell me a little bit about that article, what you were able to find by doing your research. And, the second part is, was Clemson not proactive enough in addressing their offensive issues, or at least anticipating them back in the spring and back in the summer, to where they could have gone into the transfer portal and landed these guys beforehand?
Yeah, it's hard to say, man. Like they've been, Dabo's been very upfront and honest about the fact that he just isn't a huge fan of the transfer portal. It's not something he wants to use often. So, I think that he just kind of stuck to his guns and said, hey, we're not going to go to the portal. But just looking at it, you mentioned that article up on ClemsonSports.com. I looked at several guys that were in the portal that possibly could have helped Clemson, so that, you're not going into the Georgia game and starting a true freshman at left guard. There's a guy, Wanya Morris, who signed with Tennessee out of high school, 5-star prospect, but Clemson recruited him at the time. At one point, he called Clemson his dream school. He ends up transferring to Oklahoma. Now he's on the bench there working as a reserve. There was a guy who transferred from the Ivy League who ended up at Penn State. Now he's a starting left guard there. Can play center some as well, which is where Clemson really needs help, is on the interior. So I just think that there were some guys out there. There were a few other guys mentioned in the story that I feel like could have helped Clemson, could have helped them be a little older on the offensive line, not so reliant on youth, and really help the team. As the offensive line goes, I think is kind of how the team's going to go. And so I think that could have been a big difference for Clemson. And something that's definitely worth monitoring moving forward is just if Dabo turns to the transfer portal more and is willing to take some of those chances.
All right, let's talk about that. That's actually, you pretty much led into my next question here. So at least from a recruiting perspective, I've noticed that Clemson is a program that is very old school with their mentality. Doesn't allow official visits until later on. Doesn't offer sophomore prospects or underclassmen, and then that kind of transfers into the transfer portal. They want to develop the guys that they have, that they recruited. If you want Clemson, we want you kind of situation. It has to be kind of a mutual interest in high school, not really going to go to the portal. Do you think that Clemson can win going forward in this new age of transfer portals and kids leaving after 1 year at a school? Can they win just by that old school mentality?
I mean, I still think that there's ways that you can win like that. I just think that you're going to be at a disadvantage from other teams. If Ohio State, if Alabama, if Georgia, if these other teams are willing to go to the transfer portal and bring in players and Clemson's not, I think that it's just kind of is in some ways maybe it benefits you as far as in recruiting, and you're able to tell kids, hey, no, we're going to stick with you. You're not going to have to worry about any other outside players coming into the portal. If you look at our depth chart, this is what we have. So I think that that's kind of the thought process with it. But at the same time, if you have a hole on your roster, if you have, a weakness or low numbers at a certain position, and other teams kind of have the same thing, and they're going into the portal and saying, hey, we're going to go get a player who can help us right away. And if you're not willing to do that, I think that it's going to hurt you long term. So I think that that you can still win that way, but it's going to be harder. And in some ways, I feel like your hands are kind of tied behind your back.
Matt, this next topic is related to the transfer portal, but also talking about some of the struggles that Clemson's had on offense. Do you believe that if they landed even one or two of the guys that you mentioned in your article, or maybe someone else, a tight end, a dynamic tight end, if one was available, do you think that even a couple of pieces could have fixed this Clemson offense, or are the struggles that we're seeing just too much for one or two players to fix, that it needs to be kind of a wholesale change with how they approach the game?
I don't think you need wholesale changes necessarily. I just think that it is some guys in some young spots that need to step up. On the offensive line, I think is where it all starts. And so there's no semblance of a running game right now. There's no confidence in the running game. But when you don't have a running game, then your play action passes aren't as effective. Your RPOs aren't as effective. The defense isn't worried about getting beat with a run, so they're able to bring in more defensive backs and able to watch for the pass and play this 3-2-6 we've seen a lot this year against Clemson. I think that's part of it. I think the running backs aren't doing a great job of reading blocks, and when there are yards there, they're not really picking them up and doing what they need to in that instance. So, I think a piece or two probably could fix it. Tony Elliott's been around for a long time. He's had a lot of success as a play caller. I know fans aren't thrilled with the play calling, and I get it. And I definitely think that there are some areas of play calling needs to be improved. But at the same time, I think that a lot of it is execution, which is what the staff keeps saying. If you're not executing basic things, I think it's hard to really open it up and try to get creative and try different things, different it's different calls, different formations, all that kind of stuff when you can't play well doing the formations and kind of basic stuff that you're currently doing.
Okay, speaking of not being able to execute, the fundamentals, get things done, correctly from that perspective. One thing I've noticed about DJ is he's just missed some easy throws, some throws over the middle to Joe Ngata specifically. Just a couple of passes have just dropped right at Ngata's feet. I asked him about it in one of the Monday media pressers, and I was like, is this a timing thing? Is this something where you all need to get into the same page? And he just said it's just missed throws. Dabo talked about it on Tuesday, saying that DJ's footwork and his throwing mechanics have been inconsistent thus far. He talked about his unbelievable performance that he had against Boston College last year when Clemson won 34-29. Is based on what you've seen from DJ so far, is this something where he could snap out of it, kind of flip the switch and get it going, or is it going to take a few games to get there?
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's going to happen, it needs to happen really soon. I mean, we're 4 games into the season at this point. Like, if you're going to turn things around, it's time to do it. I think the frustrating thing for Clemson and for the coaching staff is that he makes some throws that you just say jaw dropping. I mean, just unbelievable throws. The first quarter touchdown to Justin Ross in the back of the end zone, just an incredible throw. There aren't many people out there that are going to make that throw. But then, later in the first quarter, or it might have actually been before that, but also in the first quarter, you have Justin Ross running an out route, and he's open. He's got a little bit of separation. He turns around, looks for the ball, and it's flying over his head and landing way out of bounds. There was a clean pocket on that play. Nice job by the offensive line. Nice job by Justin running the route and getting open. It's just a missed throw, and that's happening way too often. I think that it's a situation where he has to be better. He knows he has to be better with his accuracy. But I'm also not sure that it's something that just all of a sudden he's going to flip the switch and it's going to be great. He's going to start throwing in all these perfect passes. I just think that it's something that's going to take time probably throughout his career. It's just working on that accuracy and becoming a more accurate passer. I think, where you make your biggest steps, I think are the off season. So obviously we're a ways away from the off season right now. So he's just going to have to work through it, play better. But at the same time, I don't expect him to all of a sudden become a perfect passer. Just all of a sudden.
So you brought up Justin Ross's name, and Justin was somebody that was talked about a lot on Saturday by the announcers because he had more than 50% of DJ's targets. DJ threw 26 passes, 14 of them were to Justin Ross. He had 8 receptions of DJ's 12. So Justin was the primary focus for Clemson's offense on Saturday. And Dabo talked about E.J. Williams, a guy that you've brought up a couple of times on the Clemson Sports show, saying that Dabo said that E.J. not getting many opportunities is an incredibly disappointing thing. Can you talk about what you've seen thus far? You're doing the film review of the NC State game. You've done film reviews for each of the previous 3 games. What have you seen in terms of the inability to get EJ involved in this offense?
Yeah, eventually EJ is going to prove me right, and he's going to make some big plays. I just think he's too talented not to. But he just hadn't gotten many opportunities, man. He hasn't been involved in the offense much at all. I asked Dabo today if that was because of his thumb and he's just having trouble catching the ball and they don't really trust him. But he said that's not the case at all. He said that, they fully trust him. They feel like he's a really good player. The ball's just not coming to him. And so, I think with Justin Ross, it was a great question by you. You asked Tony Elliott and DJ about that, just trying to get more guys involved. And they said that's just kind of what the defense was giving them, and that's the position Justin plays to where that's where the ball's going to come. But I think that you have to do a better job if you're Clemson of getting more guys involved. I tweeted it recently that other than Justin Ross, no one had a reception the final about 55 minutes of Saturday's game. About the 9:45 mark in the first quarter, Frank Ladson caught a pass. We lost a yard on the screen. No one else on the team, as far as receivers, caught a pass the rest of the game after that. So, the only player who did was Will Shipley, and he lost a yard on the screen. So just a really poor job of getting other people involved, really poor job of getting the receivers involved. I think the one area Clemson struggled is with blocking on the perimeter. But at the same time, I think that the guys will be more committed to blocking, do a better job of blocking if they're getting some touches as well. And that hasn't happened. So, receivers didn't come to Clemson. Sure, they know they have to block. They know that that's part of the job. But they didn't come to Clemson just to block on the outside. And I think that just asking them, to go an entire game where really all they're contributing is blocking is kind of unfair to those guys.
Matt, that statistic that you brought up and you tweeted it, was just super interesting about Clemson going nearly 55 minutes without a receiver not named Justin Ross catching the ball against NC State. One of the receivers who could have caught one was Bo Collins. He had one. It was going to be an easy walk-in touchdown. Just unfortunately, he dropped it. And, that's something that you want to see your younger guys get involved in and get some momentum going. And it's unfortunate that he wasn't able to, but DJ bounced right back through that great pass to Ross that got Clemson on the board. Let's switch on over to another part of the offense that's been talked about a lot, the offensive line. Dabo said in his press conference on Tuesday that they're considering anything along the O-line, even asking one of the reporters if he has any eligibility left. I may have a year or two myself, Matt. If I put on 100 or so pounds, I can slide into the guard position. You just never know. But what did you think about that comment that he made?
I'm not sure that you're going to do a whole lot better on the offensive line. No offense. But yeah, I mean, I just think it kind of shows where they are right now. This goes back to the youth and inexperience that we talked about. Just they don't have a whole lot of guys who played a lot of football. So when you're going in and Tony Elliott called it poetry in motion. Is what he likes to see with his zone run, zone read type stuff. And right now it's far from poetry in motion right now. I mean, right now it's just kind of a mess. It seems like not all 5 guys up front are ever moving in the right direction or pulling to the right spot or finding the right linebacker. Like I mentioned, T.O. and Hunter Rayburn both got some work Saturday at left guard. Neither of them I thought were particularly played well. So it's just a tough situation right now. I do think T.O. for his first start did well. I expect him to stay there at least for this week and get another shot up front starting and just kind of see how he does and see if he can continue to improve. But yeah, certainly don't feel great about the offensive line right now.
Yeah, not feeling great about the offensive line, not feeling great about the offense in general. But once again, I mentioned this in another episode, we don't want to make anything seem like it's all negative, like it's all falling down. Let's stick specifically with the offense here. What should Clemson fans be excited about, whether it's later on this season, years to come, about some of the pieces that they have right now? DJ, Will Shipley, I'll let you talk about that and I'll share my thoughts after.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that there's a ton to be excited about for this year, but I do think that there are a lot of young pieces on this offense who are going to end up being really good. The good thing about playing a lot of young guys on the offensive line right now is, hey, down the road, that line's going to be really, really good. You've got a young running back in Will Shipley right now who's a freshman, a redshirt freshman, and Kobe Pace. I think both of those guys have a chance to be excellent players down the road. You mentioned Bo Collins earlier. Yeah, he had the drop, but he also did enough to get open and get to the point where he could catch one of those touchdowns. So, I think he'll get better as his career goes along. Dakari Collins, E.J. Williams, a lot of these guys that we've talked about who maybe haven't been great up until this point. I think that I have a hard time seeing everything coming together the way it needs to this year, but I do think down the road this offense has a chance to be special as some of these guys get older and get more experience. Yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think DJ, 6'5", 250 pounds. He's the prototypical size that you want for a quarterback. He's got a rocket arm. Hasn't been used this season, but I just think they're going to have to let him loose at some point, take some more shots down the field and also incorporating him more in the running game as well. That's something that he's been able to be effective at in the past couple of games. Had that big 37-yard rush that set up the touchdown against NC State. So DJ's definitely shown a lot of inconsistency, but at the same time, when he's been on, he's been really on this season. Will Shipley has emerged as the running back of the future for the next 2 or 3 years. He's a very special player. They need to get him more involved in the passing game. I'm sorry. I mean, this kid should have more receptions than he has now. I believe he has 4 or 5 on the season, if I'm not mistaken, but he's a real weapon that they could utilize. I think they should honestly go to some 2 backfield sets as well. Him and Kobe Pace, and just try and mix it up just a little bit. Maybe incorporate also Will Taylor in the slot. Just change some things up. At this point, you're 2-2. I know the ACC championship game appearance is still on the line, but I think they should mix some things up going forward to see how they can truly unlock the potential of this offense, if not so for this year, but for next year and the year after. And I want to switch on over to something that I found very interesting doing some research on Tuesday about the parallels between this season and the 2014 season. The 2014 season, they started off with a loss to Georgia. Their first one was against SC State. And then they lost in a 6-point game to Florida State, road overtime, very similar to what we saw against NC State in terms of how that game resulted. That's a season that Dabo brought up during his presser on Tuesday, Matt. What parallels, what similarities do you see? And do you think Clemson can bounce back this year the way they bounced back in 2014 when they went on to win 9 games and the Russell Athletic Bowl?
Yeah, so one thing with that 2014 year is you had Deshaun Watson, the quarterback, who came in as a freshman. So I don't know that Tyson Fumachine's stepping in and going to do the job that Deshaun did that year. I think Deshaun was just, as we all know, was just a special talent. And so I think that was a big part of that offense getting going and turning things around. It's just you went to a different quarterback. You had a generational type player, Deshaun Watson, come in, and then he had a lot of success. So I think it's going to be harder this year to turn things around than it was that year. With that said, I do think that there are a lot of winnable games still remaining on the schedule. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they win out, or I wouldn't be surprised at all if they lose a few games and end up 6-6. I just think that everything's on the table right now. I think that there's going to be plenty of other close games along the way. Wouldn't be surprised at all if Boston College is a close game on Saturday. So, yeah, I think for sure there's some parallels to that season. Mainly that you have to try to win ugly and just try to find ways to win some games and can't worry about style points and run it up and down the field maybe like we normally do. But at the same time, it's going to be harder, I think, to replicate that success without Deshaun Watson here.
Absolutely. And while we're on the topic of looking ahead, we've got 2 big announcements that came out today. Chad Simmons released article updates on Jaleel Skinner, Oscar Delp, Clemson's top 2 remaining tight end targets. Even if you would consider Jaleel a tight end, I just think he's a wide receiver who happens to have the size of a tight end. But let's talk a little bit about Delp first. He's going to be committing on October 13th. He has a Final Four of Clemson, Georgia, South Carolina, and Michigan. Matt, I think this one's going Georgia's way. Georgia's leading receiver is their freshman tight end, Brock Bowers. Clemson has not been able to utilize tight ends at all in this offense this season. They've not been able to establish a consistent rhythm with Davis Allen and Braden Galloway. What do you think about Oscar Delp's upcoming decision? Do you think there's any chance that Clemson can win out, based on the lack of their use of tight ends this year, or do you think this is going all Georgia's way?
So I agree with you. The one thing I would point out, though, is it's kind of what we talked about Saturday is, do you want to go to Georgia and compete with one of the best tight ends in the country for playing time, for targets, for all that kind of stuff for the next 3 years? Or do you want to go to a place like Clemson where you've got Braden Galloway, who's a senior, he's about to move on. You've got Davis Allen, who is an upperclassman who's going to be gone before too long. And then, you have a real opportunity to get a lot of playing time early, come in, make a big impact as a freshman, as a sophomore. I mean, Clemson, I know the Clemson offense is down right now, but it's still an offense that has been really, really good for a really long time and that knows how to utilize the tight end. I mean, if you go back to some years in the past when they were winning national titles and having a lot of success offensively, the tight end was a big part of that offense. So I do think that's probably what Clemson's selling is, hey, come in here, play right away and help us. But I agree with you. It's going to be hard to beat out Georgia.
It's going to be hard to beat out the in-state school for Oscar. And also that point that you mentioned there about, there's going to be a need for a player of Delp's caliber with Clemson's offense. Theoretically, schools like Vanderbilt, can pitch that as well. Some of the bottom feeders in each of these conferences can say, hey, if we get, star players like you, then the offense will turn around. Now, Clemson obviously isn't at that level right now, but
yeah, I was going to say I would push back on that with Clemson's won national title. They've been in the playoffs 6 straight years. I mean, you can come and be a part of an offense, play a big role in an offense, but not a Vanderbilt type offense. It's a really good offense, an offense that's had a lot of success. And I think where those programs are saying, hey, come help us get on track and get back and have a chance to win some games. Clemson saying, hey, come help us get back on track and win national titles and have a big different level type of success. So I would push back a little bit on that, but yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean, there's plenty of places around the country where he could go in and make a big impact for sure.
I think the one thing that maybe would have improved Clemson's chances with Oscar Delp is he went to that SC State game. Look, SC State, you knew that Clemson was going to win that game. Bouncing back from that Georgia loss, SC State isn't an FBS opponent. You knew that Clemson was going to win that game. I don't understand why they did not get Davis Allen or Brandon Galloway involved in the offensive attack and just throw it, get each of them 6, 7, 8 receptions and really show Delp, hey, when this offense is flowing and operating well, this is what you can do. They haven't been able to give him any sort of sample size. Whereas with Georgia, I know that he would have to compete with Brock Bowers for some playing time, but I mean, he's their leading receiver, and that shows that there's a lot of opportunity in that offense for him. So I just think the combination of how Bowers has looked this year, Georgia being the in-state school, and Clemson's inabilities to get things going on offense has really kind of hurt them. It's just a bad timing for this decision. Maybe if he would have committed in the summer, we would be having a different conversation, but I'm expecting that one to go Georgia's way. Now let's talk about Jaleel Skinner. Jaleel has Clemson in his top 5 alongside Alabama, Florida State, Miami, and Texas. Florida's in consideration as well. He took a visit there during their game against Alabama a couple of weeks ago. This one's tough. Jaleel is from South Carolina, went to go ahead and play with IMG Academy. It's looking like Alabama is the team trending right now. They've had a lot of success at IMG Academy, recruiting players from there over the past few years. Matt, this kind of feels like the same conversation here. Do you see Clemson winning out at all? Like, is there a scenario in which you see them winning?
Well, as Chad Simmons reported today, he is going to visit this weekend. So, maybe that gives him something to think about. Maybe he bumps Clemson up a little bit. I think that he has a relationship with several players on Clemson's team. He has a relationship with Kate Klubnik and some of the other recruits on this roster. So, I don't think that Clemson's a favorite right now, but I do think possibly, they're at least going to get a shot to change that. So, definitely I think worth still following. Clemson's I don't think is a favorite right now, but I don't think that they're completely out of it. And if they were, I don't think he'd be visiting this weekend. So, I think this is an opportunity for Clemson with its play on the field and with its recruiting off of it, and just the coaching staff kind of being around them and spending time with them and stuff to try to make a jump and see if they can really get in the picture and really give themselves a shot.
Yeah, definitely agreed there. Obviously him going to the Boston College game, Boston College isn't the same opponent as, like Florida or Alabama when he went to see that matchup. But, it's going to be a night game. The atmosphere could get really crazy there in Death Valley during that time. So that's definitely a positive. On the other side, he has a commitment date of October 9th. It's right around the corner. When kids announce a commitment dates, in my opinion, I know Oscar Delp says that he hasn't made his mind up yet, but it really feels like they know which school they're going to. They're maybe taking some visits to make sure that school that they're choosing is the right one, but it just feels like his mind may be made up in the Alabama school. But like you said, he's taking the visit. I think part of that does have to do with the fact that IMG has 2 straight bye weekends, and he's back home in South Carolina, so he's right next to Clemson. Figured that he would take the visit, but you never know. When you take visits like this, things could definitely change late in the recruiting process for prospects. So we're going to see with that. We're going to have you all updated. I'm actually set to go see Oscar Delp tomorrow on Wednesday and hopefully talk with him in depth about Clemson. So be on the lookout for that on ClemsonSports.com. And that's just a perfect transition, right? Go ahead and sign up. It's $10 for a whole year or $1 for 4 months. I mean, once again, this deal isn't going to be lasting for a long time, so be sure to take advantage of it. Read Matt's film reviews, read the recruiting updates that we're going to have coming up. There's going to be some big-time prospects that are going to be in attendance for the Boston College game. So, yeah, Matt, are there any other final thoughts that you have before we wrap up this show?
Yeah, just like you said, just please come join us at ClemsonSports.com and subscribe. And, with Skinner, just going back to him, I mean, Clemson always says if we can get somebody on campus, we feel like we've got a real shot. So, we'll see what happens. Like we said, not the favorite, but they're definitely gonna make their pitch and see what happens. But yeah, just thank y'all for joining us. Check out ClemsonSports.com and sign up and read all of our content.
Absolutely. On that note, thank you all for tuning in for today's episode. Subscribe on YouTube, follow us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and we'll be back soon with a game preview and some other great content coming up.